Welcome to the deep dive. We cut through the noise, grab a bunch of source material, and pull out the key stuff just for you.
Yeah, forget scrolling endlessly. We do the digging.
And today, we're diving deep into a real gem from the Sega Genesis era. We're talking about the Vectorman series.
That's right. We've got stacks of info here, the history, how it was made, the art style, and even the stories behind the sequels that, well, never quite happened.
So our mission for you today is pretty clear. We want to figure out, first, why was Vectorman such a big deal for the Genesis back then?
And second, what made it stand out, technically and artistically, especially on that hardware.
Exactly. And finally, those canceled sequels. What do they tell us about gaming history, those interesting what-ifs?
Okay, let's get into it. To really get Vectorman, you got to picture the mid-90s.
Right, big transition time.
Huge. The 16-bit consoles, Genesis and SNES, were still popular, but the 32-bit machines were coming. Sega needed the Genesis to stay relevant.
Especially against Nintendo, right? With Donkey Kong Country and its crazy pre-rendered graphics on the SNES.
Precisely. So Vectorman, landing late 95, wasn't just another game. It felt strategic, particularly from Sega of America. They seemed, well, maybe more invested in keeping the Genesis alive than Sega of Japan at that point.
Because Sojay was all in on the Saturn by then?
Pretty much, yeah.
Right.
So Vectorman had this dual job: keep Genesis owners happy, show them what the console could still pull off.
And act as a tech demo, basically. Like, hey, look what this old machine can do.
Exactly. You see that a lot late in the console's life. Developers just squeezing every last drop of power out of the hardware.
And the team Sega picked for this was Blue Sky Software. They already had a relationship with Sega.
Oh yeah, a solid one. They did those Jurassic Park games on Genesis, which were pretty impressive for their time. Sega clearly trusted them, gave them an exclusive Genesis contract.
And the challenge was specific. Make something that looks like pre-rendered 3D, something to compete with Donkey Kong Country.
That was the brief, a massive challenge, considering how different the Genesis and SNES hardware were.
So who are the key people making this happen at Blue Sky?
Well, on the production side, you had Jerry Marcotta and Jenny Cleary. Design-wise, Rich Karp and Mark Lorenzen were key, Lorenzen doing art too. And crucially, Carl Robillard, the tools programmer.
Robillard. Okay, his name sounds important.
Absolutely critical. He built the Vectorman animation tool. That was the secret sauce behind the game's look, the vector piece animation.
Right, let's break that down. Vector piece animation, what exactly was it?
Okay, imagine Vectorman himself isn't one single drawing, but made up of 23 separate little sprites.
23, little building blocks.
Exactly. And the key was getting all 23 of those sprites to move perfectly together, in sync. That coordination allowed for incredibly fluid animation.
Yeah.
And they got it running at 60 frames per second.
60 FPS on the Genesis? That's impressive. That sounds really demanding.
It was. The inspiration, apparently, came from older Amiga computer demos, these vector ball demos. They use simple shapes, like spheres, moving together to create the illusion of 3D. Robillard adapted that core idea for the Genesis' sprite system. Super clever.
And the result wasn't just smooth animation, but the controls felt good too.
Yeah, reviewers raved about how responsive it felt, like zero lag. You press jump, Vectorman jumps instantly, no wind-up.
That immediate feel makes a huge difference in an action game. Now, I heard the original game concept was different, something about balls.
Yeah, that's right. The very first idea was literally all balls. Vectorman, enemies, maybe even parts of the levels, all built from spheres.
Just spheres, why?
The thinking was it would make transformations and scaling effects easier, more dynamic. But they realized pretty quickly that characters made only of spheres felt a bit abstract, lacked relatability maybe.
Okay, so players couldn't quite connect with floating balls. Makes sense.
Right, so they started adding more recognizable shapes, arms, a head, making Vectorman and the bad guys look more like distinct characters.
And the main bad guy, Warhead. He wasn't always Warhead.
Nope. Originally called raster.
Raster, like raster graphics.
Exactly. As opposed to vector graphics. It's a little inside joke, a nod to the game's own tech. Vectorman's vector piece animation versus the traditional raster approach.
Clever. But maybe a bit too clever for mass appeal. Warhead is definitely more visually striking.
Yeah. Changing the name and design probably helped. It shows that tension, right, between the cool tech novelty and making something players actually recognize and connect with.
Let's talk more about that visual appeal. The art style was a huge part of it.
Oh, absolutely. Amber Long was the lead background artist, working with the guys like Jeff Jonas and Mark Lorenzen again. They created these really rich, detailed worlds.
And Vectorman himself, this Orbot character.
Yeah, Orb plus robot. A sludge barge pilot cleaning up a polluted Earth after humans left. That's the setup.
A janitor saving the world. And that vector piece of animation, it wasn't just for smooth walking, it enabled the morphing, too.
Precisely. Because he was made of these pieces, he could rearrange himself into like a drill or a bomb or even aquatic forms. It was core to the gameplay for puzzles and fighting.
And Warhead with the atomic bomb head. Can't forget that.
Definitely memorable. And the levels themselves were praised too, weren't they?
Yeah.
Hugely. People loved the pre-rendered look they achieved. The variety was Great Rowans, Arctic zones, bamboo mills, levels with tidal waves.
They really squeezed a lot out of the Genesis graphics.
They did. Used dynamic lighting, parallax scrolling for depth, lots of little atmospheric touches like flags waving, stuff that made the world feel more alive.
It sounds very much like a direct answer to Donkey Kong Country's visuals.
Oh, it was. No question. The whole art direction stemmed from that challenge. They even threw in some nods to the Amiga demo scene, like the 3D title screen and rippling text effects. Shows where some inspiration came from.
So the look wasn't just accidental, it was born from needing a technical solution.
Exactly. It was pure artistic skill and clever programming workarounds that made Vectorman look so good on older hardware.
Okay, visuals nailed. What about the sound? The music was pretty unique, too.
Yeah, the soundtrack.
Yeah.
That was John Holland. Interestingly, he was kind of new to game music then.
Really? Because the soundtrack is so distinctive, techno vibes, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
He pulled influences from Kraftwerk, Orbital, The Prodigy, even Goatrance. Really electronic.
What was he going for, atmospherically?
He mentioned wanting something rhythmic and danceable, but also slower and moodier than your typical platformer music. Gave the game a unique feel.
But the Genesis sound chip, notoriously tricky to work with, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Holland famously called it like writing a concerto on a ukulele. He used this sound editor called GES, which he described as pretty primitive.
Ouch. But he still managed to make something great.
Absolutely. Despite the limits, the soundtrack got huge praise. People loved the quality, the atmosphere, how it matched the visuals.
And didn't it get its own CD release, which is unusual back then?
It did. In '96, Sega Tunes, Vectorman. Holland got to redo the tracks with higher quality sound, no Genesis chip limitations. He composed, produced, performed it all himself. It's cool to hear the enhanced versions.
Yeah, we looked at the track list. Like, the main theme is obvious, but other tracks like Fortified seem to line up with levels like Terraport or the Bamboo Mill, maybe.
It's fascinating hearing his full vision, right? Without the technical handcuffs. It really shows how sophisticated game music was becoming, even on 16-bit, and how much artists like Holland were pushing things. That music was a huge part of Vectorman's identity.
Okay, so tech, visuals, sound, all groundbreaking. Let's talk gameplay, story, and how it all landed.
Right, this story. Set in 2049, Earth's polluted, humans fled, leaving robots Orbots to clean up. Warhead goes rogue, takes over. Vectorman, just a sludge pilot, comes back to stop him.
Got it. Environmental themes there, but you said they didn't really impact gameplay.
Not directly, no. It's more just the setting, the backdrop for the action.
And the action itself, what kind of game was it?
Primarily a 2D run-and-gun platformer. Think Gunstar Heroes, maybe, or Contra. Some Mega Man vibes, too.
Standard stuff. Run, jump, shoot.
Core abilities, yeah. Run, jump, basic pea shooter. He had that double jump that could damage enemies, too.
Yeah.
You collected power-ups, health, better guns like the Bola gun. And, of course, the morphing was key for getting around and solving little puzzles.
Any curveballs in the gameplay?
Yeah, they threw in some top-down perspective levels and boss fights, which mixed things up nicely.
And when it launched in '95, big hit with critics.
Huge. Reviews were glowing. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it like an 8.25 out of 10.
Yeah.
Praised everything, graphics, animation, sound, levels, morphing. One reviewer said the graphics totally blew me away.
Wow. And GamePro.
Even more positive. Near perfect scores, love the guns, morphing, levels, controls, graphics, sound, basically everything.
Yeah.
Mean Machines in the UK called it an excellent showcase for the Mega Drive.
Pretty much universal acclaim. And your recurring points of praise.
Consistently.
Yeah.
The graphics, the smooth animation, the music and sound, the tight controls, and the level design. Just rock solid across the board.
Were there any criticisms?
Minor stuff, really. Some felt it was maybe a bit short. Not everyone loved the overhead sections. And the final boss could be a bit of a bullet sponge, you know. Took a lot of hits.
Okay, critically adored. Did it sell well?
Yeah, did pretty well. Around 500,000 copies in the US by the end of '95. One of Sega's biggest sellers that year.
Still less than Donkey Kong Country 2, though.
Yeah, DKC2 was massive. But for a brand new character, late in the Genesis's life, 500,000 was really good. Sega backed it with a big marketing budget too, supposedly $12 million.
So it showed that technical excellence in marketing could still launch a new IP successfully then.
Definitely. It totally fulfilled its mission for Sega, showed the Genesis still had legs.
And its legacy today.
Widely seen as one of the absolute best, most technically amazing Genesis games, plus those subtle environmental themes which you saw in a few other Genesis games too. Interestingly, it never got a proper retail release in Japan back then, only later in PC compilations.
Okay, so Vectorman 1, huge success. Naturally, Vectorman 2 followed pretty quickly in 1996.
Yep, greenlit almost immediately. Blue Sky Software was back as the main developer. There's some confusion about another studio, Drooling Dogs, maybe being involved. But the core team was Blue Sky.
Who is running the show for the sequel?
Jerry Marcotto was Sega's producer again. Jerry Huber produced for Blue Sky. Keith Freiheit was designer and lead programmer. Rick Schmitz led the art team. Usual suspects mostly.
But the development environment was tougher this time. Genesis was really fading by 96.
Oh, totally. The 32-bit consoles were taking over. So Vectorman 2's development was rushed. Much shorter cycle.
How did that impact things?
Well, for one, they reused the engine from the first game to save time. We even know about leaked prototypes with unfinished test levels, which kind of shows the pressure they were under. That rush definitely limited how much they could innovate, you know?
And it came out late 96, right, November 15th in North America. One of the last big Genesis games from Sega.
Yeah, alongside Sonic 3D Blast. Sega tried some promotions, like a morph design contest on the Sega Channel and a play-to-win contest with a big cash prize.
Trying to keep interest alive. Must have been hard selling Genesis games then.
Very tough market. So artistically, how did Vectorman 2 compare?
Visually, it kept that pre-rendered look, but the enemies changed, didn't they? More organic?
Yeah, a definite shift towards insect-like enemies. Bugs, basically, culminating in that Black Widow Queen boss. Maybe that was quicker to design under pressure. Just guessing.
Did reviewers like the look?
Generally, yeah. Comments about cleaner, crisp, stunning graphics, better lighting, more parallax scrolling for depth. Look good.
But the level settings changed too. Less post-apocalyptic.
Right. More modern settings. And that got mixed reactions. Some found it a bit generic compared to the first game's unique worlds.
And more levels, but smaller.
22 levels versus 16, but yeah, generally shorter, smaller scale. Again, probably a result of that faster development. Mixed reviews on that point too.
And John Holland returned for the music.
He did. Soundtrack was described as maybe more varied electronically, larger, more diverse. Still got praise for atmosphere and execution. Also had more sound effects, clearer voice for Vectorman, sounded a bit deeper.
Okay, gameplay. Any big changes there?
Core run and gun was the same. Power-ups came from organic power sacks instead of TVs. That was different.
New weapons.
Yep. Laser cannon, pulse beam, fireball, super shot. More firepower options.
And the big new feature was that morphing thing, right? Assimilation.
Yeah, the assimilation morph. Defeat certain enemies and you could turn into them for a bit. Like a scorpion to walk on hot stuff, a rhino beetle to ram things, even a tank or a helicopter.
Cool. Was that a core mechanic?
Kind of.
Oh.
It added a new layer, but the morphs were often pretty specific to certain levels or situations.
Yeah.
Not something you used constantly everywhere.
So how did Vectorman 2 do with critics? Positive, but maybe not as positive.
That sums it up pretty well. Generally positive reviews in '96. People acknowledged it pushed the Genesis hard and was a good late release. But yeah, often seen as less groundbreaking than the first one. And it struggled commercially against the DKC sequels.
EGM gave it a decent score, 7.2510. Praised the gameplay, graphics, but noted the levels felt small to some.
Right. But interestingly, EGM still named it Genesis Game of the Year for '96.
Really? Why?
Probably context, right? There just weren't many other big new Genesis games coming out that year, so even with flaws, it stood out.
Makes sense. GamePro liked it more.
Yeah, GamePro gave it near-perfect scores again, praised the cleaner graphics, more sound, faster gameplay, complex levels. But later, retrospective reviews have been a bit more mixed. Sega 16 liked it, but noted less theme variety. Hardcore Gaming 101 called some level design bland, or claustrophobic, despite the nice graphics.
Any common complaints back in the day?
Some found the level design repetitive in spots, maybe some cheap enemy placements, and felt the stages built around the assimilation morphs could have been developed more.
And sales-wise? Probably took a hit compared to the first one.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
We don't have hard numbers, but the Genesis market in late 96 was just tough. Competing with 32-bit consoles and Nintendo's established hits, it was an uphill battle. Anecdotally, it was popular, but likely sold way less than Vectorman 1.
Okay, so the sequel was solid, but faced challenges. Now, the sad part, the canceled sequels, there were multiple attempts.
Several, yeah.
Yeah.
Across different consoles, none ever made it out.
First up, Sega Saturn. Blue Sky themselves tried to make a Vectorman 3.
They did. They saw early previews of the Saturn hardware and got inspired. Started planning Vectorman 3, sometimes called Vectorman Ultra.
What was the plan?
Based on concept art, it looked like a 2.5D side-scroller. Evolving the look of the first two, maybe using some Saturn 3D power, but keeping the side on view.
Sounds cool. Why didn't it happen?
Bad timing, mostly. Right after Vectorman 2 finished, Sega terminated Blue Sky's development contract.
Ouch. Why?
Sega was struggling financially, Genesis money was drying up, the 32X failed, Saturn launch was rocky. They were cutting costs everywhere. Blue Sky got caught in that. Just shows how publisher problems can kill promising games.
Man. And then there was that weird rumor about a Genesis and Game Gear Vectorman 3 in 97 for a 98 release.
Yeah, that popped up in a leaked Sega document. Super late for both systems. No other details ever surfaced. Probably just an idea that went nowhere, or maybe even a mistake in the document. Definitely never happened.
Okay, fast forward to the Dreamcast era. Vectorman Neo. That involved some ex-Blue Sky people?
That's right. V-Blank Entertainment. Founded in 2000 by some key Blue Sky veterans. They were passionate about Vectorman, built their own engine, and went to Sega. Sega apparently even had Vectorman on a list of IPs they might revive.
Did V-Blank make a demo?
They did. A playable demo for Vectorman Neo, showing him on a new alien planet. Looked interesting.
But Sega passed.
Ultimately, yeah.
Yeah.
Around 2000-2002. The reason given was basically brand recognition. They worried Vectorman just wasn't a big enough name anymore to guarantee success on the Dreamcast.
It's tough. Reviving older niche IPs is risky, especially when you're launching a new console and need big hits.
Exactly. Sega probably felt their resources were better spent on bigger, safer bets for the Dreamcast.
And then, the most famous attempt, the PlayStation 2 reboot by Pseudo Interactive. This one was really different, right?
It's totally different. Announced April 2003. Pseudo had pitched Sega in 2002 with a tech demo that sounded like Smash TV.
Smash TV, okay.
Yeah, but the Vectorman game they ended up making was a 3D third-person shooter, only like 20% platforming, set on planet Gamma 6, new villain named Volt.
Third-person shooter. Wow, what was the focus?
Big focus on destructible environments, like up to 80% destructible, powered by a fancy physics engine. Also promised smart AI, lots of weapons and upgrades, throwing enemies and objects.
Sounds ambitious.
Yeah.
Any morphing?
Vehicle transformations were planned, but apparently not in the E3 demo they showed. They were aiming for 60Ps, but the demo ran at 30.
And Vectorman himself looked totally different, too.
Completely redesigned, very heavily armored, robotic look. People called him Vector Chief. Concept art by Frank Druczynski. Really departed from the orb design.
Did people like it at E3 2003?
Got some positive buzz, yeah. EGM compared the graphics to Halo, the weapon customization to Ratchet and Clank. GameSpot liked the AI and physics.
But it got canceled, too. November 2003. Why this time?
Development was reportedly bumpy, but the main reason seems to be huge restructuring at Sega of Japan, probably tied to the Sega-Sammy merger, plus maybe some negative reaction internally or from fans to the radical redesign and genre shift.
So company politics and maybe misjudging how much they could change the IP?
Seems likely. Trying to turn a 2D platformer into a 3D shooter, it was a big leap. And the timing with Sega's restructuring was just bad luck.
But some of that work survived. Prototypes were found.
Thankfully, yes. A collector named Combi Laurent found and preserved about 11 prototype builds and lots of development documents. Really cool stuff. Offers a peek into how it evolved.
Any interesting finds in those prototypes?
Yeah, apparently one build, version 3.14, was closer visually to the original games and supposedly better received by those who played it. Maybe the shooter direction wasn't the only path they explored.
Wow, what a saga. It really shows how hard it is to bring back these 16-bit classics in later generations. So many things can go wrong.
Absolutely. Contract issues, brand recognition worries, company restructuring, maybe unpopular redesigns. Each attempt hit a different wall. And it hurt the studios involved, too. Blue Sky, V-Blank eventually closed.
Yeah.
Pseudo Interactive took a big hit.
So no new Vectorman games, but the originals still live on, right? Ports and compilations.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The original Vectorman is everywhere. Windows, Linux, Wii, Virtual Console, Steam, Sega, Forever, on mobile. It's even coming to Nintendo Switch Online soon. Vectorman 2 got a Windows port, too.
And they're always in those Sega Genesis collections.
Always. Vectorman 1 is in the Sega Smash Pack for PC. That was its first Japanese release, actually. Sonic Gems Collection. Sega Genesis Collection for PS2, PSP. Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection for PS30, 360. The Genesis Mini.
Vectorman 2 is in a lot of those, too.
Yep. Sonic Gems, Ultimate Genesis Collection, the Genesis Mini 2. Those Sega Mega Drive Genesis Classics collections that are on everything now.
It feels like Vectorman 1 is in every single Genesis console collection.
Pretty much. It shows Sega knows it's historically important, a cult classic. They use it to showcase the Genesis tech and tap into that nostalgia. Keeps the games alive and accessible.
Good that the originals are preserved. What about other stuff? Merchandise? Cameos?
Seems pretty limited back in the day. Do you see vintage t-shirts pop up on eBay sometimes? There were print ads, a TV commercial for Vectorman 2.
No toys, comics.
Doesn't seem like it based on what we found. No concrete evidence. Maybe Sega just didn't see the same merch potential as Sonic.
But fans keep the flame alive.
Totally. You find fan-made stuff, online stickers, shirts on Etsy, Redbubble. Shows people still love the character.
And appearances in other games.
Overwhelmingly just in his own games and those compilations. No big official cameos in other Sega series during the Saturn or Dreamcast days.
Really?
None. Not that we can find documented. There is an unofficial appearance, though. He's playable in that fan-made kart racer, Dr. Robotics Ring Racers. Someone even did voice lines for him.
Ah, cool. But the lack of official cameos suggests Sega saw him as respected but maybe second tier compared to Sonic.
Yeah, seems that way. A beloved game, technically brilliant, but not pushed as a major company mascot.
So wrapping this all up, what's the lasting impact, the core legacy of Vectorman?
I think it really comes down to the tech and art on the Genesis. That vector piece animation, the pre-rendered look they achieved, John Holland's amazing techno soundtrack, it all came together to make something truly unique and memorable for its time.
Definitely a high point for the Genesis graphically, a real swan song showing what that hardware could do even late in the game. The canceled sequels are a shame, but the original games clearly made their mark.
No doubt. And the fact they keep showing up in collections, that fans still care, that speaks volumes. They were technically stunning, looked unique, played great. That's why they're cult classics.
So as you think about everything we've unpacked about Vectorman's journey, here's something to chew on. How much does that kind of technical innovation, that unique art style, really define a game's legacy, even if it never becomes a huge franchise? And what other technically amazing but maybe short-lived series from back then deserve another look today?
Good question, Ponder.
That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.